This isn't just another Caribbean sunset story. This is Barbados, an island known for its postcard beauty, quiet neighborhoods, and close-knit families. But behind the stillness of Tudor Bridge Street, a tragedy unfolded that would tear one family apart and rattle an entire nation to its core. This is a true crime story about blood ties broken by violence and justice waiting in the shadows. Tonight, we unravel the haunting case of Sergeant Antonio Rochester, respected officer, father, husband, murdered in broad daylight, and the man accused, his own stepson. You're watching Nexus Shadow Crime Files. Turn down the lights, lock your doors, and remember sometimes the greatest dangers lives within the family. To outsiders, Sergeant Antonio Rochester was a decorated officer, an unwavering figure of strength in the Barbados Police Service. But to his stepson, a man he helped raise, this relationship may have felt like the ultimate betrayal. Before that fatal afternoon on January 2nd, 2025, Omel Justin Walrond bore a quiet torment. His younger brother had vanished from the family home, taken into a psychiatric institution under Sergeant Rochester's authority. There were no calls returned, no letters answered, no visits allowed. It happened long before the screech of tires and the fatal impact. In the early hours of a Wednesday, just after 3 a.m., two plainclothes men slipped up the driveway at the Rochester home on Olive Gap Road. The only sound was the whisper of wind through the mango trees and the faint hum of a distant generator. Inside, Sergeant Rochester's wife answered the door. Her husband was on patrol. Omel was away for the night. All she saw in the porch light were faces she didn't know, eyes cold with purpose. They showed her a court order, an official directive to take her younger son into custody for psychiatric evaluation. She begged them to wait, to let him gather his things, to let her husband come home first, anything. But their instructions were clear. They moved with quiet efficiency, as though this were a matter of routine. Her son, half asleep in his pajamas, was escorted out without a backward glance. A single officer murmured, "It's for his safety," and that was all the explanation they gave. They didn't allow a suitcase, no phone calls, no visits. By dawn, her boy had disappeared into the locked, sterile world of a psychiatric facility whose gates refused to open for family. When Sergeant Rochester finally returned, he found his wife standing alone in the empty living room. The house felt hollow, as though his son had never existed. Weeks later, nothing had changed, only rumors. Rumors that her son was heavily medicated, slurring unintelligible speech. That he was confined in a room, and every knock on the door brought no welcome, only the echo of absence. Omel wasn't at home when they took his brother. By dawn, the impossible reality sank in, and with it, a grief so raw it threatened to consume him. He had no money for lawyers, no powerful friends to pull strings. All he had was his phone and a desperate hope. In the early hours of the morning, he recorded himself in his dimly lit apartment bedroom. His voice shook as he pressed record. "They've taken my brother. Please, if anyone out there can help me, I'm begging you. He's trapped somewhere, sedated, alone. I don't know who to call or where to turn. I was going to start taking him on the road with me, teach him the ropes, help him earn a living, give him something to believe in. Now I don't even know if he's okay. Please, somebody help us." The video spread like wildfire. Thousands watched, hundreds commented. Digital hearts and prayer emojis poured in, but no one offered a real lifeline. No legal advice, no private investigators, just empty words that vanished as quickly as they appeared. With every new view, Omel felt more invisible and trapped in a fight against a system he couldn't afford to challenge. Walrond obsessed over every unreturned voicemail, every unanswered letter, convinced that his brother's spirit was dimming behind those locked doors, and that Rochester had wielded his badge as a weapon against his own blood. Each night, Walrond imagined the sterile white walls of that mental institution. He pictured his younger brother slumped in a metal chair, sedated until his voice faded to a mumble. He heard imagined whispers of medical staff injecting sedatives, the whir of IV pumps marked by a soft mechanical hum, and the distant clank of cell doors. In the lonely silence, Walrond felt nothing but dread, a sense of helplessness that pulsed through him like a second heartbeat. All along, kept wondering and telling himself, "You really think you know the people closest to you, until they use the law to silence the ones you love the most." On that bright, hot Thursday afternoon, the heat laid heavy over Tudor Bridge Street. The sky was clear, the road was dry, and little to almost no traffic. There's no excuse and no mercy. Just after 2 p.m., along the same street, a white pickup truck roared into view, its engine growling like an enraged beast. The tires screamed in protest as the driver slammed his foot to the floor and pushed his truck to the max. An instant later came a thunderous metallic crash. The sound was a sickening symphony of metal biting flesh and of bones splintering under an unforgiving force. Sergeant Antonio Rochester, who was on his way home from work, was probably prepared to have some cooked food and a welcome afternoon rest before hanging out and playing dominoes later that night. Yes, this same Sergeant Rochester was now unexpectedly pinned to the Trinity Academy School's concrete wall, his life flashing before him as he took his last breath. All while staring deep into the eyes of his murderer as he entered the afterlife, unprepared and knowing who had done it. His life and his clothing now stained crimson in a single heartbeat. The white flatbed truck didn't slow, didn't swerve, not even for a second. In those split moments, Omel Walrond made his decision. He would not be stopped. Later, forensic investigators pieced it together. The truck was moving at least 65 kilometers per hour, fast enough to throw a human body nearly 70 meters, more than enough to kill. There were no skid marks, no screech of brakes, no last-minute lurch to avoid impact, just a brutal, unbroken charge forward, an act of vengeance delivered through rubber, steel, and intent. The intent of a man who was willing and prepared to kill by any means necessary. Within the hour, law enforcement had a name. The suspect, Omel Justin Walrond, 36 years old, Stepson to the man he had just murdered. He lived in Olive Gap, Tudor Bridge Street, just 280 meters from the scene of the crime. A killing that happened almost in his own backyard. Omel Walrond, approximately 5 feet 10 inches, medium build, dark-skinned, a man who stood silently over his stepfather's body, a lawyer at his side, hands raised. He surrendered, calmly, without a word, not even a backward glance. Authorities acted quickly. He was charged with murder and remanded to Dodd's prison in St. Philip, Barbados. For over 5 years, Omel Walrond lived a quiet and honest life. He spent his days behind the wheel of a freight truck, crisscrossing the island from sunrise to sunset, hauling goods and minding his own business. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no run-ins with the law, except for one. His only trouble had ever worn a uniform. His stepfather, Sergeant Antonio Rochester, badge number 897. Omel's first court appearance was scheduled for February 6th, 2025. But by January 9th, as the new year began to unfold, no plea had yet been entered. It was only the beginning, an opening act in what would become a grim legal drama. The first murder case of 2025 on the island of Barbados. Under Barbadian law, murder carries the gravest of consequences, the harshest penalties. It falls under the Offences Against the Person Act, Chapter 141, a statute etched deep into the island's legal foundations. By definition, murder is the unlawful taking of a life, committed with malice aforethought, that is, the clear intent to kill or to cause grievous bodily harm. In recent times, the law has evolved. Constructive malice, once used to elevate any fatal act committed during another offence, has been abolished. Today, for a killing to qualify as murder, a deadly intent must stand on its own, independent, deliberate, unmistakable. Section 2 of the Act once enforced a chilling certainty. Every murder conviction demanded the death penalty. No exceptions, no appeals for leniency, just the finality of the law. And although no executions have taken place in Barbados since 1984, the statute still remains firmly in place. Came the 2018 amendment, a turning point. It gave the courts discretion. Upon conviction, a judge may now impose either the death penalty or life imprisonment, depending on the circumstances. But make no mistake, the conditions for capital punishment remain razor sharp. Among them, acts marked by excessive brutality, such as when a victim is violently crushed against a concrete wall with no chance of survival. Deliberate, calculated planning, evidence of premeditation, not mere rage or provocation, and the victim's status, they serve in the police or armed forces. Though Sergeant Rochester was off duty, the badge he wore in life still elevates this crime in death. Finally, there is the broadest test of all. Any exceptional circumstance the court believes justifies the ultimate penalty. It's not just about what happened, it's about how, why, and who was left broken in its wake. Beyond the charge of murder, prosecutors in Walrond's case may seek a cascade of additional offences, each compounding the gravity of what took place that night. Under Section 81 of the Road Traffic Act, causing death by dangerous or reckless driving carries a maximum sentence of 10 years behind bars. Then there's Section 90, subsection 3, which deals with failure to stop and render assistance at the scene. Classic hit-and-run behaviour. That offence alone can land a person 3 months in prison, a minimum fine of $250, or both. In total, Omel Walrond now stands before the law facing an arsenal of charges, from cold-blooded murder to a series of traffic and procedural offences, each carrying its own heavy sentence. But the case cuts deeper than legal codes. A Barbadian sergeant, off-duty yet sworn to protect, was struck down in broad daylight by someone he once welcomed as family. And it happened on an open road. A road shared by strangers, bystanders, pedestrians, children. Any one of them could have become collateral damage in a moment of targeted violence. This wasn't just the loss of a single officer. It was a shattering blow to a community's sense of safety and trust. At Mount Pleasant Cemetery, the funeral service felt like a nation's collective soul laid bare. Senior Superintendent Brooms spoke solemnly about Sergeant Antonio Rochester's life and legacy, describing him as a man who wore the uniform with honor and served with quiet strength. The packed chapel was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant echo of a hymn sung by the police choir, a final farewell for one of their own. Then, from the pews, Dr. Tarkila Rochester rose. The young physician stood flanked by her brother, Antonio, and their mother, Jennifer Sandiford Rochester. She stepped forward toward her father's casket, draped in the Barbados flag, resting just feet away. Her voice was soft and heavy with grief, yet unwavering. My father is the best father I could have ever asked for. If I had the option to choose, I'd choose him again and again and again. He gave his all to make sure we had everything we needed: structure, guidance, and the freedom to find ourselves. He was always there when we needed him. Dr. Tarkila Rochester had only just graduated in June 2024 from St. George's University in Grenada. A proud moment etched into her memory was standing side by side with her family on that warm June day, her father's eyes filled with pride and joy. He was a man of good character and displayed the true definition of love. He was my mum's confidant, her everything. Hearing him dedicate karaoke songs to my mum was one of my favourite things to witness. The way he treated my mum served as a perfect example of how someday I hope that my own future husband will treat me. They were always inseparable, and I would always laugh at my mum saying that she was obsessed with him. They were good for each other, a perfect couple. As tears streamed down her cheeks, she turned her gaze briefly towards the sky, then back down to her father's coffin. My dad wasn't just a self-sacrificing father, but he was also a patient, kind husband, a son that made his parents proud, and a good friend who touched the lives of many. Anyone who had the pleasure of knowing him will miss him. The moment was raw, honest, not rehearsed for public ears, but spoken from a place of real pain, the kind of grief that grips a family and leaves echoes in every silence that follows. His wife, Jennifer Sandiford Rochester, remembered him not just as a sergeant, but as her partner in all things. For over 30 years, she stood beside him, watching him serve others, while never failing to serve his family with just as much heart. She stepped forward during the service with trembling hands and a warm smile, one that fought to hide the storm behind her eyes. Then, in a voice soft but steady, she read a poem. The church is full of people who have come to say goodbye, but no one wants to see him go, and we're all asking why. In our pain and tears, we share a heartache that cannot heal, but in our minds, we keep memories no one can steal. All the while, social media bubbled, then boiled with rumour and outrage. Some mourned Sergeant Antonio Rochester as an unselfish public servant who gave 30 years to his country. Others questioned everything. They accused the Barbados Police Service of being a house built on corruption, of covering for their own, and behind the image of a devoted officer, some whispered darker questions. Had Sergeant Rochester always used his badge for justice? Or, at times, for control? They asked whether he ever wielded his authority to silence family members he found inconvenient, issuing sanctions, making problems disappear behind the quiet walls of psychiatric care. And then came the question no one wanted to ask, but couldn't ignore. What about your family? Are any of us truly safe when those with power can use it without consequence? It was a chilling thought, one that cast a long, dark shadow over his funeral and refused to leave. Reverend Peter Haynes stood before the mourners and reminded them gently, God walks with us through grief. Even in the darkest tragedies, faith still flickers, a glimmer of hope, however faint. Then came the Guard of Honour, senior officers in immaculate dress uniforms, heels striking the earth in rhythm as they marched to the graveside. Among them stood teammates from Rochester's football days, no longer in jerseys, now in black. They honoured not just a sergeant, but a friend who once chased goals on the field and in life. As the casket was lowered and the earth began to fall, a single bugle broke the silence. It played taps, soft, solemn, final. For many, it was the last salute to a man of unwavering principle. But for others, it echoed with questions that refused to die. How does a family man become a tragic headline? Can love and betrayal ever truly be separated when both collide in a single violent moment? Back inside District A Magistrates Courtroom, number 1, on the morning of February 6th, 2025, Omel Justin Walrond stood before Chief Magistrate Ian Weeks. His face was solemn. Behind him, family members wept quietly, but neither their tears nor the emotional weight hanging in the room were enough to sway the bench. His bail was denied. The magistrate committed him to stand trial. The prosecution painted a chilling portrait of revenge, a man who turned grief into violence. The defense countered with a different image, a tortured soul unraveling under the weight of unhealed wounds and unbearable loss. Now the island waits, not just for a verdict, but for closure. Will the scales of justice ever balance the weight of a family torn apart? Or will the truth remain buried beneath layers of betrayal, silence, and pain? Down on Tudor Bridge Street, where the blood was spilled, some say they still feel it. An unease in the air, like a whisper in the wind. Passers-by speak of strange chills, hushed voices, a presence lingering by the roadside. They say it's him, Sergeant Antonio Rochester, still asking, why? Why did someone he loved end his life? What truly pushed Omel Justin Walrond to the edge? Was it the quiet, creeping agony of a brother's laughter lost to silence? The sting of betrayal from a man sworn to protect and serve? Or was it something darker, a perfect storm of pain, pride, and repressed fury brewing beneath the surface until it finally broke? Tell us what you think in the comments below. If the story of Sergeant Antonio Ricardo Rochester stirred something in you, hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to Nexus Shadow Crime Files. The truth matters, and so do those we lose, whether to death or to the system. Until next time, stay vigilant, because the people closest to you are often the ones you never truly know.